and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections. The result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable House will sit in. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Mrs. Robinson, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Montague. Who's that? Okay. Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting up there, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Miss Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Hagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, McNeil, Miss Nito, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Mr. Robertson, somebody's there, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, with Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, the debate on the
Order, please.
debate on the appropriations bill will continue today with the leader of the opposition making his contribution at a later stage in the proceedings. In addition to that, there is a motion in respect of notice of extension from and future prosecution for not declaring interest in business conducted as a member of parliament with the government of Jamaica.
Members, the House is in session. I am requiring the rules. The next item is announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Annual report of the Development Bank of Jamaica Limited for the year ended March 31, 2018. The Foreign Nationals and Commonwealth Citizens Employment Work Permit Visa Amendment Regulations 2019.
Members, I have at this time the presence of a number of visitors, former members of Parliament and ministers and senators. And we have from the Norman Manley High and our students and their teachers. From Torrent High, students, we welcome you here today and hope you enjoy the session. Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of orally. Mr. Samuda.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next House I will move the following motion. Whereas subsection 1GI of section 41 of the Constitution of Jamaica requires a member of this Honourable House of Representatives to vacate his seat if a firm in which he is a partner or any company of which he is a director or becomes a party to any contract with the government of Jamaica for or on account of the public service, or if he becomes a firm or a director or manager of a company which is a party to any such contract. And whereas the Member of Parliament for St. Mary's South East is a director of MedPro Jamaica Limited, which business includes all pharmaceutical supplies, sundries, and other items sold in a pharmacy not limited to medications, as well as back-to-school supplies. This company may enter into contracts with the government of Jamaica and its agencies. And whereas the member has disclosed his interest in this company, be it resolved that this motion to the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Whittle.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice. Next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the Foreign Nationals and Commonwealth Citizens Employment Work Permit Amendment Regulation 2019 under the Foreign Nationals and Commonwealth Citizens Employment Act, which were laid on the table of the House on the 14th day of March 2019, be referred to the Nations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration. And Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at the later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relate to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier. Mr. Speaker, third reading, I want to advise the House that the decision has been taken that in the instance of the membership on this ethics committee of Dr. Bloomfield, they will be replaced by Dr. Maurice Guy, the member from Central St. Mary, with the approval of the House. If the House so approves. I'll pause and then come to third reading.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, to be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that the motion be approved.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As of it. Motion approved.
Mr. Speaker, all that remains really is for me to invite you to request. Aren't we at public business? To invite the leader of the opposition to make his presence.
Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, it is with a of honor and privilege that I rise once again to participate in a budget debate in this House. I think at the outset, Mr. Speaker, it is worth observing that none of us who get to make our in this House get here without the support, guidance, and encouragement of others. So at the very end, I would like to give thanks to those who have made it possible for me to be here and to participate once again in this budget. First, Mr. Speaker, much thanks to St. Andrew, who have returned me as their Member of Parliament over the last 25 years. I thank Councillors Nena Wilson and Dennis Gordon, who represent the Hagley Park divisions respectively, for their continued support, as well as Ms. Waynette Strawn, who leads the efforts to hold our standards high in the Cassia Park. I'm also indebted to all the members of the constituency executive, the divisional executives, and the People's National Party organization in East Central St. Andrew for their continued and sustained love and support. I'd also like to thank my colleagues and comrades in the People's National Party, both those in Parliament and those outside, whose continuing support and encouragement and prayers have been an inverse of strength for me over the years. I'd also particularly like to express my appreciation to my family. My wife Sandra is unable to be here today in person as she's on. Consequently, I'm represented here not so much by the member from Northwest who is not here because he's in Portland. Yes. But I have brought Rian. I have two sons up there, Luke and David. And they are in the gallery now. Who knows? And there is one not here who may very well be the one come and sit in the chamber. No, you mean to? No. You mean send one over there? No, their grandfather and father and great-grandfather will have a big problem. But I want to thank my family. Without their support, this task would be infinitely more difficult. My other sources of personal support include my household staff, detail, members of the shadow cabinet, and again, the team in the office of the leader of the opposition, led by Mrs. Imani Duncan Price, and the team at the headquarters of the People's National Party, led by the General Secretary. A special place is reserved for the thousands of Jamaicans who offer their prayers and their guidance for my success. They express their hopes and aspirations for our mission through personal conversation, emails, letters, prayers offered, messages, and the like. I want to give thanks to you all and to the clerk and to the other staff of the House who make our tasks here, generally speaking, easier. Generally speaking. None of this, of course, would have been possible without the blessed great architect of the universe, without whom nothing would be possible. Mr. Speaker, at every stage of my life, whether as a high school student, a university student, a young Rastaman, a Black Power militant, university, or an elected representative of the people, and now as the leader of this great party, the People's National Party, I have always been motivated by the desire to serve my fellow Jamaicans. Service has meant sharing their lives and helps a way to realize their hopes and their aspirations. Together, we will continue to work to build a Jamaica in which every citizen, regardless of class, color, race, or religion, has access to the same opportunities for personal upliftment and for the fullest realization of their personal talents. Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the Minister of Finance last week, I found myself reflecting on the discussions I've been having with the Jamaican walks of life, in their districts, in their communities, in the town centers across our beautiful island. I listen to their concerns as they relate the stresses of daily life, the worry about not making ends meet. I hear from our teachers and other public servants, the police, the men and women buying in the markets and those selling in the markets. I see the despair in the eyes of our farmers and the young men who see no options, the small business life, and the single mothers who shoulder life alone on behalf of their children. My presentation today is for them. It is a duty to be the voice for those Jamaicans who are excluded from the office which was presented last year. The budget presented by the Minister of Finance brought to mind the first lines of the famous novel by Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities. He said, "It was the best of times and it was the worst of times." The official story, the official narrative given by them would say in effect that this is now the best of times. But at best, that story is an incomplete story. And at worst, that story, the official narrative, is a distortion of the reality by far too many of our people. Therefore, my presentation will concentrate on the people's experience. However, let me first commend the current administration for maintaining fundamental reform program that they inherited from us. Before proceeding to Mr. Speaker, let me particularly welcome the members of the diplomatic corps who have taken the question of the administration's continuation of the economic reform program was dealt with, I believe, extensively and brilliantly by the Finance and Planning, the member from South St. Andrew, last Tuesday. The progress made on the economic reform program, which was started in 2013, has continued in critical areas. The debt is further down. That's a good thing, the public debt. Job creation has continued. That's a good thing. Some economic growth has been sustained and the revenues are up. I note with particular increase in revenues that, as has been pointed out already, has come as a result of the comprehensive tax reform efforts that were put in place between 2013 and 2016. We strengthened the administrative powers of tax administration. We passed legislation to access third-party information and introduced transfer price rules. We put in place measures to incentivize the productive sectors and improve the rate of return on investment. An amendment was made to the Customs Act, which reduced duties on commodities and eliminated duties on all productive inputs. We reformed the incentives regime to level the playing field economy. We must now examine whether the budget presented will use these increased revenues to improve the quality of life for the majority of. A careful reading of the budget shows a lack of understanding of the workings of the economy, and even more painful, a lack of appreciation for the day-to-day realities faced by ordinary Jamaicans. The minister announced a $14 billion tax giveback as the major component of a stimulus program. The question is, who will get the tax giveback? Will it be the majority of those who made the sacrifices 6 years ago to initiate the economic reform program which enabled these increased revenues? Public sector workers whose sacrifice included a 5-year wage freeze, 2 years with the previous JLP administration, and 3 years on a program that started in 2013. The financial sector also played their part, and the pensioners paid their part. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the pensioners' contribution I liken to the widow's mite that we all learnt about in Sunday school. Because while in absolute terms for each pensioner it may have been a small amount as compared to the bankers who gave up interest, it was a greater share of it was for the bankers. It was a contribution that they could scarcely afford, given that pension increases had been flat over those years. Made these sacrifices, and those are the ones who should be first in line when the chance came for a giveback. The benefits that derive from the national to the national economy should be shared by all the people. It shouldn't read like a friends and family discount, just going to one segment of the investor community. The role of the economic reform program, together with the sacrifice to restore Jamaica's financial stability, shouldn't be taken lightly. I still recall the situation that existed before we embarked upon the reform program. Consecutive quarters of negative growth. Debt, which was 107% of GDP in 2007, was climbing. The then JLP administration had effectively abandoned the 2010 IMF program after just 1 year. They missed the majority of the deadlines and the structural benchmarks thereafter. Poverty levels doubled from 9.9% in 2007 to over 18% in 2011. In the international financial markets. And in fact, some were describing us as being on the way to becoming a failed state. The road at the beginning of the economic reform program was particularly difficult. I had to face the IMF, the IDB, the World Bank, and others who doubted that we had a capacity to do the reforms. There was a loneliness that I often felt when negotiating the best deal for Jamaica, when there were others, some on that side, who were saying, sign now, sign at any cost, as our reserves declined. They said, take any deal on offer. After successfully renegotiating the IMF agreement and re-establishing Jamaica's credibility by consistently passing the test, they started to sing out a tune. And them say, all we could do is pass IMF tests. Could we have gotten this far to where we are today without passing those IMF tests? Look at what I have come to say. Those who were criticizing yesterday are now the same ones reaping the fruit today and rejoicing. But is love still? Nothing is wrong. As they say, Paul was watered and God Almighty gave the increase. So we are happy for Jamaica's sake. But the important lesson is that we got here on the basis of a national consensus. And that consensus, if I am to talk the truth, you are here at the consensus as someone who came late to the party. No, I never talked to you. I talked to him. There is enough stones coming to you. Don't take up his own.
Dr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, please address the Speaker. And let us not have this crosstalk, please.
We were able to mobilize this national support because of the confidence of the people and what they had in our commitment and capacity to deliver. While all segments participated, Let there be no doubt that it was the workers, the pensioners, and other consumers who bore the brunt of the tax packages that were then imposed. And the poorest bore the greatest burden, Mr. Speaker. In light of this, it is a travesty of justice that those who sacrifice the most in bringing the economic reform program into being are not getting any direct benefit from this tax giveaway. The budget presented by Santa Clark, the Minister of Finance, gives us little comfort in the fact that it excluded the majority of Jamaicans. That is not how you build a Jamaica that works for all. In sharp contrast to the minister's official narrative of the best of times, the reality is that our hospitals are overcrowded and under-equipped, and too many of our people, old and young, have suffered from the mismanagement, and some have died from the mismanagement of the recent dengue epidemic. The people's reality is that food prices are becoming increasingly unaffordable. In the cook shop like the one Miss D runs, the size of the box lunch that she prepares is being reduced as she tries to hold prices, but she can't keep up the same supply of food in the lunchbox. The official narrative doesn't reflect that aspect of the people's reality, Mr. Speaker. Tanisha, a nurse, tells me at the supermarket that the dollar can't stretch. As she reaches the cashier, she's embarrassed to have to put back some things. And Mas Harris says the same thing happened to him. He's a pensioner. The official narrative won't tell you that. Gas prices for motorists are higher today, even though oil is at $58 a barrel. Almost half what it was in 2013 when oil was at $98 a barrel. The official narrative is silent on that. The official narrative also won't tell you that last year Jamaica had the 5th highest murder rate in the world, and that most people don't feel secure. Half of the city of Kingston is regularly today without free-flowing water supply. On top of all of this is the reality of mismanagement and corruption. In this debate, Mr. Speaker, we have to recognize the experiences of overwhelming majority of Jamaican people who every day are struggling to make ends meet. We must do this because the official narrative leaves them out. There must be a better way. The official narrative set out by the minister won't tell us that Marcia, the bank teller, finds it hard to get to work and to get our children to school, while we allow the public transportation system to run down. It won't tell you that of those employed, over 700,000 are at or near the minimum wage and are quickly losing hope of the prospect of a livable wage. And these persons have families who depend on them. We can all easily agree that some work is better than no work. But when we look closely at the employment numbers, what we find is that the greatest share is in the BPO sector, under rent and construction activities, building activities. But the next significant segment of those employment numbers that have grown includes what they call other community social and personal activities. People engaged in vending, car washing, window wiping. We call this, in reality, the hustling sector in the country. Have been long here. These are not the signs of the kind of economic development that we seek, and they are not the signs of economic development that economists usually point to. We have to look beyond the figures. It is also of significance in relation to the BPO sector, as former Prime Minister Bruce Golding pointed out recently in an article in the press, that of a sample taken of recent UW graduates, the average wage earned by 25% of the graduates was $50,000 a month, and 75% earned under $100,000 and were unable to meet their student loan obligations satisfactorily. How did they start life and raise families? Even some of those who are working, the working poor, are one prescription bill away, or one kidney dialysis away, or one other medical event away from abject poverty and crisis in their lives. Now, while some jobs have been created, let us not lose sight of the fact that there are some 404,000 Jamaicans between the age of 15 and 55 who are not seeking work and not working. So while Johnny and Marie might get a short-term job, Mikey and Dottie are outside of the labor force. Where are they in this budget narrative? What is provided for them in the official narrative that we were presented with? All these people are hoping that the budget presented by the minister have better explained their present hardships and presented real opportunities for their lives. Simply put, their lives are not headed in the right direction. There must be a better way. Not only is the official narrative out of touch with the people's reality, but it is also woefully out of touch of the economy. No matter how you want to nice it up, Minister, if 5 in 4 was abandoned last year, this year the budget buries it. We are now in year 4. And you talk about 1.5% growth. Growth next year is predicted by the fiscal policy paper to be lower than growth this year. No better proof exists of the failure of the administration to deliver meaningful growth than their abandonment of the 5 in 4 mantra. Remember the launch? Remember all the pepper lights? No, but it's true. The failure to grow the economy is not only being confirmed by the international community, but what it shows is gains previously made in creating a propitious, a favorable investment environment in the country are being squandered. Those gains are being squandered. Over the past year, Jamaica's ranking has fallen on critical global issues. The ease of doing business ranking prepared by the World Bank, Jamaica fell from 70 to 75. Forbes' best countries for business report, Jamaica fell from 72 to 80. On Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, we fell from 68 to 70. And in the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, Jamaica's fell from 70 to 79. That is not heading in the right direction. That is heading the wrong way. So, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the hardship of the majority of the Jamaican peoples and the likelihood that will remain anemic, there is much mismanagement. In fact, the youth in Maxfield Park, them don't say mismanagement, them say damagement. And that is what is occurring. Take the issue of road construction. We left a financed program of road construction together with a process of consultation and a template of coordination to facilitate of road construction with minimum disruption. This process is what made the implementation of the Portmore Highway construction take place without disruption. We were able to accommodate the traveling public, accommodate all the commercial enterprises, large, small, including the Portmore fishing village that was on the causeway. Under this administration, the implementation of the road construction program has become an albatross around the necks of both the traveling public and businesses alike. That is not managed, that is damagement. Who would contemplate locking down every major thoroughfare in the corporate area at one time? And when the decision was taken to lock them down, there was no provision either for pedestrians or motorists, not dialogue with the business operators in the areas affected so that they could benefit from their views as to how best to do it. More damagement. And to make matters worse, the required coordination between the national agency, the implementing agency, and the contractors, and the other affected enterprises seem to have been non-existent.
Mr. Simudo, the time for speaking on members has expired. You may wish to.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the member's time be extended sufficiently to enable him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those in favor. Dr. Phillips.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the members. This coordination between the agencies within government and the businesses outside government, like the telephone the providers, internet providers, seem to have been non-existent. In the inconsistency of trying to secure economic growth and simultaneously close down the businesses along Constant Spring Road, Hargley Park Road, 3 miles, and around the Portia Simpson Miller Square. Madness. Employees have had to be arriving tired and frustrated as a result of the inept scheduling. JUTC can't complete their routes because of the traffic piles. The daily dust on Constant Spring Road make everyone, and especially the asthmatics, suffer. Gas stations have closed. Businesses have had to relocate. Doctors' offices and other businesses have had to operate on an itinerant basis. People operate with cell phone out of their pocket because the telephones at their businesses don't operate. I recall there that the late Roger Clark experienced when he cut down one guango tree in Ligani, and the dislocation it was said to have caused. In contrast, there was no apology from this administration for all the chaos and damagement visited on the Jamaican people because of this problem. Too many people are faced with emergencies, including medical emergencies. In this gridlock, nobody seems to care, and you're telling us you're heading in the right direction. It's not the first time that roads in Jamaica. I remember when I was Minister of Transport and Works, we did 4 roads, Malines Road, 4 roads to Boulevard at 6 Mile. No such dislocation. We did Hope Road, Ligani to King's House. No such dislocation and chaos. Let us not forget the buck for this mismanagement stops with the office of the Prime Minister. That is not just the businesses closing down, but when you look at it, because of putting up an overpass, you disrupt the water main coming from Spanish Town to Kingston. Who is in charge here? And then you're trying to repair the damage of the original one, you damage the replacement again. More damage. Mr. Speaker, I feel particularly affected by this because the people in Hagley Park Road are part of my constituency. I share a good part of Hagley Park Road. And the residents, as well as the business, have been without adequate water supply for months. In fact, you have some too? You have some too? Yes, yes. We're spending most of the time, the last few months, getting water truck to schools, to basic schools, to people, to residential communities, satisfying businesses. Quite frankly, I believe there is a case for legal action to be taken by many of those businesses against the state. Some of them have gone out of operation. I want to thank the Water Commission because truthfully they have tried in different circumstances and they have been responsive. I don't problem rests with them. The problem is a lack of ministerial oversight and a lack of coordination as the contractors and some of the agencies seem to be a law unto themselves. What? Lack of the member from South St. Andrew spoke about the problem of the inflated Ministry of, what you call it, Economic Growth and Job Creation. He called it the Wagga Wagga Ministry because it is impossible to give the kind of oversight. We know the circumstances of the public sector. Lots of these things require direct ministerial oversight and involvement. Without them runs awry. It may have been a good thought, but when you notice that it's not working, wheel and come again. That is what leadership should involve. Look here.
No. Please address the speaker and do not cross talk
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm addressing the House Leader
do not disturb the speaker while he addresses the speaker. Mr. Phillips, will you address the speaker and proceed with your
Mr. Speaker, look here, there are times when we quarrel. This is not one. Up to now. But seriously, Mr. Speaker, the issue is not whether the minister is helpful. I have found the minister helpful. I have found other ministers helpful. The issue is setting up systems so we don't have to seek the perception of a minister day after day to get something done. And so people without a links like we have a links, can get service delivered to them without having to have the links. That is what, Mr. Speaker, in this catalogue of mismanagement, forgive me if I single out what appears to be a deliberate attempt to allow the JUTC. I feel particularly strongly on because Jamaica spent a lot of resources in out the previous operations when we had the one-man, one-bus system. Don't forget what that system was when the cry was no schoolers and the little children had to stand at the back of the line, and we had people, we had young students murdered, dying for no other reason than for trying to get off the bus. But now, what do we have? Over the past years, more than 100 buses at JUTC have been put out of service due to lack of maintenance. Fare revenues have fallen by over $1 billion in the period between 2016 and 2018. Projections of the JUTC for 2019-20 are estimating $9 billion, the highest ever. The Ministry of Finance is providing some support to make up this loss, but what they are providing is not sufficient to make it up. At the same time, there seems to be a free-for-all in the grant of licenses for taxis and others, which is going to have the effect of causing more pressure on the company. It is going to have the effect of further running down the company and the day, returning us to the day when what you will have is viable public transport system for a city of 1 million people as we have in the Kingston metropolitan.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Modern city.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Please, let the minister state his point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the member is misleading the House because utilization of the transport sector, we are very clear that the additional license they have the exemption of the KMTR. 225 sub-franchise licenses are available under the JUTC. The liberalization parishes not within Kingston and St. Andrew, and that has been very clear.
Mr. Speaker, it has become a pattern in this House that people interrupt the way. That is no point of order. Mr. Speaker, he has an opportunity. He has an opportunity to respond. Mr. Speaker, there is no plan to return the JC to financial viability. Simply is that a modern city with a productive economy cannot do an effective public transportation. Mr. Speaker, I believe, if your memory still serves you, you have experience, you have a recollection of the 1980s. Sometime. All of, Mr. Speaker, no ill intent is intended. All of us forget things Carl said that he doesn't even remember now. Mr. Speaker, a word to the wise. should be sufficient. Prime Minister, don't allow the JUTC to disappear and mash up again. The country spent too much to get where we are. Health is yet another that is afflicted by poor management. At the Cornwall Regional Hospital, despite repeated assurances of its repair, is still below acceptable standards. At the Bustamante Children's Hospital, there have been approximately 200 less procedures done in 2018 than they did in 2016. Not because there were 200 fewer children in need of procedures, of the decline in capacity to do these procedures. Hospital. At the Kingston Public Hospital, it's now operating, Mr. Speaker, they say at 110% capacity. What that means that approximately 1 in 10 of the patients doesn't have a bed to lie down in. That's what it means. They're sleeping in wheelchairs, on benches, and even on the floor. This is not only happening at KPH, it's happening at Savlamar, Maypen, St. Anne's Bay, and at other hospitals as well. Mr. Speaker, there must be a better way. All across the health system, we see every day after day that the free health care policy is an illusion, because there you can't go further in the system to get the treatment that you need. Patriotism and the professionalism of the doctors, nurses, and the other medical professionals, and the health workers, and the health administrators, the whole system would have crashed by now. There must be a better way, Mr. Speaker. When you look at agriculture, you see the evidence of the damagement again. For us on this side, a fundamental weakness of the budget, and it is the failure to recognize that the rebuilding of the rural economy is a critical cornerstone of any inclusive model of economic. Also a pathway to wealth creation for rural families. The collapse of export agriculture, and in particular sugar, and the failure to modernize domestic agriculture has left the majority of Jamaicans who live in rural Jamaica facing poverty, and has opened the doors for the proliferation of crime throughout rural Jamaica. Agriculture, 150,000 jobs, and represents 7.5%. Average wage and average income in agriculture is lower than in the other sectors of the economy. And on the problem of agricultural incomes and rural incomes, you won't effectively tackle the poverty overall nationally. In the official narrative, we are told that agriculture is humming at 5% growth. But this is below the potential of the sector. The truth is also that when you look at our major export sectors, what we are seeing is in agriculture. The food import bill is surging again, $1 billion. We have tried to reduce it. This represents ineffective wealth from rural Jamaica to overseas farming communities. Our sugar industry is deepening. The closure in Monimus of the factory has resulted in $30 million less per fortnight being spent in the South Clarendon communities. The bars, the supermarkets, the corner shops down there have been closed. Westmoreland, another major sugar producing parish where the cane farmers are bearing the brunt of that crisis. From his own, because of the new arrangements, they are not certain next year. They have received one payment. They don't know what the final payment is going to be. Both of Speaker. Westmoreland traditionally has been carried by tourism and by some domestic agriculture. When sugar falls out, as it has, not the slack, and a portion of the people are turning to other activities, including criminal activities. And the same thing is happening in Clarendon. That's why both of those parishes are having spikes in criminal activity and in violent activity. And yet there is no plan. For 2 years we were told all kinds of nice things going to happen to sugar. Nothing. No plan, no specific message today in Westmoreland whether they should plant or not plant next year. We hear that there is going to be for South Clarendon, lands are going to be divested. But how? And what is? And indications are that the crisis is in sugars because the Duckenfield factory in St. Thomas is going to close as well. And then the crisis is going to spread. Look at coffee. 3 years ago, farmers were getting $12,000 a box for Blue Mountain coffee beans. The last crop coffee was being purchased for around $3,000 a box, little more. Clearly our farmers can't buy fertilizer, pesticide, and all that goes into produce $1,000 per box. Nor can they take care of the needs of their families for education from government. As what we it will be some form of crop insurance to store less than the social, not some of the concoctions that they have. So cocoa is among the best cocoa in the world. Have a situation where the cocoa farmer with what was negotiated in dollars US a ton, and it is cocoa farmer. As bad as the science, energy and technology, including $1 billion. Simply put, people are hiring friends and aid to cost. It was in early 20s to never come back and say, boss, that's not right. Political connections. Then there was the plans for Petrojam in any government that converted into the pocket. Bushing scandal. Then use of funds at the Student Bureau. You know, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they are usually very circumspect. Of USAID, I believe it was, as part of a cost of $6 billion, National Land Agency have been farming these lands. What applies Kalalu to an agro-processor for export and was prepared. But there is in of the properties as was the opportunity to participate in the purchase of the lands and without any tender process. We understand. Have they been sold? Are they? NEPA always objected on the basis that it. Has there been a change in NEPA's position? And on what is happening there appears to be a travesty if you want to reach your growth targets. let me say, we are making a formal demand at the government and reverse the decision to. This is a pattern, you know. It's not the first time this is happening. No. St. Thomas. We see it also in what has been happening at the Mount Nell consultation. It is moving in the wrong direction. Mr. Speaker, so they call it incentive for some. That's why I hope it keeps. This administration, all three have grown hand in the period between 2012. The average again has increased to 1,420 resources. When the mobility of the police force became, that was using used cars. But put that aside, the mobility of the force was compromised. Take the police out of the line, give them way in excess of normal hours, which left them over 2. Budgets were tightened because of the speech. Last year, the promise to pass, but those legislative measures would have been critical for the. How do we explain the low numbers on the ground? Mr. Speaker, those without recourse to the courts. And we met at Vale Royal on January 7th. We had agreed in Honorable Attorney General. So there is a start. Minister, set the date. Ingredient for sustaining the reduction of criminal activity in the parish. The Jamaica Defense Act to give more powers to the JDF if that's what we are united. Yeah. I now turn to the root of the problem. Available resources in a manner which deepens, not reverses, Washington Manley, and carried more passionately during our history for years. First issue, Mr. Speaker, and finally decided to undertake a study. Mr. Speaker, our determination to proceed on this path is urgently needed if we do not squarely hand in the sun. But they would also be able to use what needed now. That is going to require not only consensus, it's going to require that theory, simply put, both local and foreign. Nor am I as an urgent necessity of those times. Their rights under the false premise of contract work. 10% of the children in this not being able to see way. You all know of the situation which this has become. He says, unless you have interest, contract rights nor do words as father and let us and sustain prescriptions to government. Jamaica is a phone. But of Jamaica is music. I was going to say is where we can build truly work for the majority building of the rest of Jamaica's GDP. When you talk something off the requiring employers times that which will get intention to process and buy $1 billion JDOT. The reason why we need to face the number and not earning enough. Don't do it. Where every student not own it, operate it. Payments will be kept as a percentage of income, not room in the shortest possible time. If you want to drive in your tax money, help. Mr. Speaker, so that they can be used. No, don't ponder no more at large lands. Oh, we need also the society oversight mechanism. Just the engagement of an excess of cash and universal funds
in the government, because the theft is
Let me say, Mr. President, that their agencies spending hard-earned taxpayer money. We need to. Time has come. Has come. This is which requires specific technical, where we can find advertising, independent public service interest. A small country, general citizenry in the administration of things, as I've said time and time again, and most important, line up immediately. They have been languishing for too long. Expectation, given the, and indeed, I think the first year of office and budget speech, there were 30 more 2017. I don't believe that has been kept. Mentioned already the promise to merge the civil, not kept. We had the promise and performance.
Point of order, Dr. Phillips.
No, it's a clarification.
I need a clarification, but
He
the
has
house
to-
is being the house and the facts, the security forces in St. James. Operational normally about that 20 men used to be moved from Area 2. And in addition to that, they are still deployed. They continue to go down there, be deployed in St. James. Enter second any of the men out there. Thank you.
I received, Mr. Speaker.
You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, reality is being followed. Does so many feel is being reversed. The budget does not offer relief for that better way. It is a more effective crime plan. It's a better way that prioritizes the rights of the real benefits and prospects. By the grace of together we can build, and fairness are the foundations on which last.
Order, please, Mr. Caenwood.
I think it is. I think, but now the 15th of March.
But before members, where they are till the May. This House now stands adjourned.
Happy birthday, Jason. I just wanted to date, and I can't wait to give you your present.
First, stop. Use your eyes and mining.
I would like to see a Jamaica where a safer Jamaica would